Hi there and welcome to the Bitstocks podcast. My name's Antonio Shillingford. I'm one of the relationship managers for Bitstocks and I'm here with a special guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, my name is David Arakelian. I am the CTO of Bitstocks.
So you've been with us for a long time now and very much the person that puts all of Mike's crazy ideas into practical scenarios. So first of all, before we actually start tucking into the subject, how'd you get on with that? Because I know he does have a lot of crazy ideas, but very constructive.
He does have very crazy ideas, but they make sense in very long term. So immediate way to solve those ideas is to come up with a smaller pieces of puzzle to solve them. And that's how we try to cope, just to decouple them in small pieces and make sure that we do them block by block.
Yeah, so pretty much what you're saying is a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, I would say so.
Right, so today's topic is going to be about the Halvening event. We know that it's coming up. And of course, the last time the Halvening event actually happened, to be honest with you, there wasn't actually too much activity. So the price didn't really fluctuate too much. But this Halvening event is greatly anticipated because we know that it will have quite an impact on the miners that are currently in the space. So just before we actually start tucking into the Halvening itself, how about we just detail what miners' roles really are?
Yeah, sure. The main role for the miner is to validate the transactions and put them in a block and then propagate those blocks across the other miners so everybody knows where the network is. And it is very simple to explain this way, but behind the scenes, there's loads of things which is happening because the miners trying to compete between each other to make sure that they find the first block and to get the rewards. Yeah. And there's lots of optimizations that they need to do. They need to buy lots of hardware to always stay on top of their game. And to be honest, as a mining operation, it started very like a small hobby initially. I still remember the first times when, for instance, I got into mining. It was simply buying a graphics card, turning on a Windows machine, clicking an application, and that's it. You're set. You can mine. You can wake up in the next morning. Fingers crossed your graphics card didn't burn down. You would have some rewards. And that was it, pretty much it. It was very easy to mine. That was circa 2013. Yeah. However, that has evolved into truly like a business-like operations, I would say, because now mining is more like a business, not like hobbyist. You can still do like your own solo mining, which consists of you owning like a small miner and trying to contribute towards the global mining, which is a pool. Yeah. So you just connect to a pool and try to get some rewards from there. But big companies are now just buying loads of hardware or trying to offer like a pools where they have their mining operations running and people are running their minings through them. So that's what it is. Truly, at the beginning, minings wasn't really defined as like a revenue stream for someone who wanted to just mine because it was as a hobby. It was easy to do. There was no really like cost involved. Everybody could have joined the network. That was easy. But since 2015, 2016, it started to be like more and more business-like operations.
Yeah, and that's when it basically turned into pretty much data centers, because you're completely right. In the very early days, it was just very much a hobby situation where people can literally use their home computers or home setups and they would actually receive a decent amount of value. A lot of people weren't really treating it as a business because they weren't taking into account electricity expenses, etc. It was just something cool to be doing at that particular time.
It was like a side project for most of the people.
Exactly.
I didn't even think about like the monetary incentives. Yeah. What will bring it to me? All I cared is like, how does this thing work? Because all you are getting is like just magic tokens. Yeah. So
exactly. And that's kind of how everyone thought of it at that time as well, was just tokens. But now we're starting to learn that Bitcoin is so much more than that. It is a technology, it is a time chain. And with that, you can put pretty much anything you want, from a like on a post to your company. Like it does span its actual real use cases. So that is exactly why now people are actually getting serious about it, because the amount of data that they're actually going to be containing in each and every single block is expanding. So with that happening, you need to make sure that you have a solid infrastructure that is going to be providing the power to organize and, of course, hash these transactions. So that leads us perfectly into effectively what are the incentives then, which wasn't too much, compared to now. So what are the incentive for these miners to actually grow these businesses and effectively compete?
So it is important to start, as you said, from the beginning. The bootstrapping of the network. I call that term the bootstrapping of the network, because what really happened is that the miners were getting quite a large portion of the rewards at the beginning. They were around 50 Bitcoins. Well, it was exactly 50, sorry. And that allowed everyone and anyone to join the network, to create the network. That was the stage where the network started to be sustainable, because more people started joining. It was easier for anyone to join, and the bootstrapping happened then. And monetary incentives were none at that time, because 50 Bitcoins were dirt cheap. But it was quite easy to mine for everyone and to get a bigger share. So a lot of people were just, as you say, mining for getting those virtual tokens. So there was no really like incentives at that stage. What happened at that stage was the system was designed to incentivize people to mine it by giving them like loads of coinage, which is 50. And after a certain period of time, which occurs around 4 years, every 210,000 blocks, something called like halvening of the rewards. So we already happened like previously in when it went from 50 to 25 and then reduced again. And now we are at 12.5 Bitcoins per block. But we saw that when there was like more and more people joining the network, the difficulty of the network is increasing, because for the miners to sustain like that threshold of being able to deliver blocks every 10 minutes, the network adjusts itself to make sure that it maintains a stable ratio of providing coinage per day. I think roughly it's 144 blocks per day, which brings us to 6 per hour. And to keep that record and to be as close as to that number, the system adjusts itself as how many miners are joining or leaving the network. So to answer your question in terms of like how it was before and how it is now it is, I think, more like a proper business. And people who join, they do want to have monetary incentives as rewards back. So what they are investing into mining, they want to at least recoup some of the investment that they make. And for the data centers and everybody who is putting massive efforts into providing those services to run huge mining operations, we see loads of monetary investments going into it. And we are at the stage where I think we are getting very close to see what really Halvening will do this year around. We have probably another 6 months to go until the next halvening happens on all the 3 Bitcoin networks, which is the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, and Bitcoin. And
that's not to jump ahead, and we'll tuck into this later on in the episode, but that's a very interesting one, because this is the first time that we've actually had 3 competing chains that have a decent amount of value and a decent amount of hash power added to them. The first time we're going to experience a halvening during this period. But we'll tuck into the intricacies of that later on. But the way that I see how these miners started off for the very early days, from them getting 50 Bitcoins, for example, of mining a block, and that was their reward. Of course, at that particular time, fees weren't really there. It wasn't really something to take into account, because there wasn't just enough transactions happening on the actual chain at the very early days. So how do you incentivize these miners to actually get involved in the first place? Yes, it's very much of a hobby thing, but you need to entice them in some form of way. And the way that I see them starting off at 50 Bitcoins is pretty much like jump starting a heartbeat. And that's why the incentive was so big. I know the price point was low, but the incentive was so big at that particular point. And if you believed in Bitcoin and you understood what it does change in financial markets and the financial system, then you do really start to understand it, and you'll be more than happy to be one of those people that are there giving it that little jump start.
So indeed, we have noticed what really happened is that at that stage where the inflation rate of Bitcoin was higher because it was producing more coinage, and whoever was mining, they weren't straight selling them to realize the gains or just to convert it to fiat. What they were doing, they were hoarding.
Yeah.
Because they were believing that in the future it will be valuable, it will gain more value. Hence, you also had like the side effect of those coins were removed from circulation, which in return created some sort of like scarcity, because the beginning of the coins were like quite high. If you calculate like 50 coins per 10 minutes, that's like 4 times more what we have right now. So the amount of like inflation was quite high.
Yeah.
And people were banking on the future. They were trying to see and gain the system in such way that I'm not spending that much money right now, but I might actually gain quite a lot in the future if I hold into this. Yeah. That was the mentality. There was no such thing as I will gain fees or anything like that. Everybody was just targeting the block rewards. That was it. There was nobody else who was thinking about fees. The fees were quite low. Even the block size at that time was quite small. The block size has increased. It was never just 1 megabyte. It was gradually increased because of the demand. But at that time, the fees were nowhere near of what they were getting right now.
Yeah, and because, of course, this system is deflationary by design, so it comes to a point where on the traditional Bitcoin network, so to speak, the one that effectively has the marketing presence, it's not the traditional structure of the token economics of what Bitcoin provided. They've slightly skewed those now. And that has a massive effect on mining. It's predominantly miners that will get impacted on this. So with it making sure that it has the halvening events that happen every single 210,000 blocks now, these miners are going to get to a point where they need to start receiving value in another way. And just speaking on it in a very linear view, Bitcoin, 1 megabyte block size, to me, it doesn't make sense at all, because now what you're doing is you're making all of these users, Bitcoin was originally designed to have perfect token economics so that the miners, the users, and end of the day, the merchants that are bringing it to everyone are all operating perfectly together. And everyone is incentivized to be using and also not just using, supplying the network. So with the block size effectively being pegged at 1 megabytes, now let's look at who that actually affects. That affects the users. Now, in what way would you say that affects the users? Because of course, now the users have to compete.
Indeed, what we saw in maybe 2017, end of 2017, is that it created like a crazy fee market. People were competing to broadcast their transactions and make sure that it gets approved by the network. But I want to jump back one stage back, which is the 1 megabyte block was never meant to be there forever. And if you read historically, like all the messages of Satoshi Nakamoto and what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it, that was just a temporary measure to limit the spam, because the network was just starting to bootstrap and it was dangerous at that stage. There was no monetary incentives. Somebody could have just spent some money and just destroyed the network. But now it became like more and more resilient, and that 1 megabyte limit shouldn't be there. So what really happened with Bitcoin BTC, it diverged into a different model, which is the fee market. So people are basically now banking on the Bitcoin BTC model, which is the price should gradually and constantly go up, and the fees will go up as well. And with the halvening, there will be some sort of scarcity because the supply will be reduced. So that is what we think will happen. That's what the Bitcoin BTC people believe. Personally, I don't believe that will be the case, because that's very, very illogical for me. You will see, as you said, the first people who will be affected are the users. What will really happen, I think, is the users will use that system at some sort of threshold, because humans by nature, what they do is if they see something like that they are used to use and the price value of that thing just increases, they still continue to use it, but only a temporary side, because at the same time they are looking on the other direction to find a replacement. They are not going to stick with that technology in this case. They always look more for another solution. And we have seen that the demand for like breaking that 1 megabyte limit was reached, the prices went up, and then the transactions slower were just like blocked at 1 megabyte. There was no such rush to higher. And people migrated to other blockchains. They were trying to find Bitcoin.2 solutions, which didn't turn out.
Diamond.
Yes. But that's just the normal human nature and economics. That's what really happened. And that's what also will happen in the next halvening, I think. And as you said, the users will be the first people to be affected. They will just use it shortly, and once they see the negative side of the system, because it's not beneficial for them to use that system, they will just stop. Or it will be very, very, very minor people who will be still using the system, but then the miners will have no incentives because suddenly they have no fees to take, and their revenue will be just slashed.
Yeah, exactly. And the more interesting thing about that as well is, I know we're talking about users here, but majority of those users, the main users will be companies, which will be very mindful of the expenses that they're incurring. So perfect example, us, the back end of 2017, when the Bitcoin network pretty much peaked, price point peaked, transaction volumes were there as well. There was a huge backlog of transactions just sitting there waiting to get pushed into the network. This is a real scenario, and this is exactly what we was just talking about. In that situation, for example, for me just to do a transaction, there were situations where I was paying anywhere between $20 to $50 to push through my personal transactions, because I had to just try my best to outcompete that whole backlog of transactions of everyone else trying to get involved into a block. So that's what that 1 megabyte block size limit actually does. It does really, really put a huge bottleneck on the Bitcoin network. Now, us as a company, we spent ridiculous amounts of money during that period just trying to make sure that our transactions were getting processed. And I'm very sure that is something that we will never, ever want to do again. And because of that, even if you're looking at, not in the sense of a user, because mine was $20 to $50, that I can potentially stomach every now and then, but it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. It's not going to make me want to come back. But fundamentally, it's going to be the companies within this space that really does bring this mainstream. If you don't have the company support, you're not going to bring this mainstream. Yeah, so you need to incentivize also the companies being users within this space. And that's the most important, because that's really and truly what the people out there are going to be experiencing.
Businesses, if they invest into the Bitcoin ecosystem and buy the idea and they want to build companies around that, they need to provide services which people will be using, as you said. If we provide services and we charge astronomical amount of money, nobody is going to use our services. Hence, we are not going to use the Bitcoin network, and we are just going to wind up and not make any use of it. It's just common sense. It is literally just common sense.
And of course, now, like I said before, we're in a situation for the first time ever where we're going to have this halvening event where we have Bitcoin, BCH, and BSV. So now 3 competing chains, so to speak. But we was actually running these figures, and I think you've actually got them in your notepad.
I have some figures which are very interesting. So as I was saying, roughly within 6 months, we will be having the first halvening happening on the Bitcoin networks. And as of today, because the numbers can change if another miner joins, but roughly speaking, we have Bitcoin Cash, which will be the first one to undergo the halvening, followed by Bitcoin SV. So Bitcoin Cash will be 185 days, Bitcoin SV will be 198 days, and then finally by Bitcoin, which will be around 225 days. So it will be interesting to talk about the dynamics, what will happen at that stage, what we believe would happen at that stage, because those are very competing chains together. They want to basically be the one. So right now, in terms of like majority hash power, everything, almost 95+% is on Bitcoin network, and Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV are competing between each other. But what do you think will happen given that Bitcoin Cash will be the first one to undergo, followed by BSV and then?
And just to put this into context as well. So these are all run on SHA-256, meaning that me as a miner, I can jump between any one of these assets effectively. So this is why it's so interesting, because from the top asset to, of course, the last one being Bitcoin, there's about a 35-day period. Bear in mind that you're going to have BSV and also BCH. They've experienced the halvening event, meaning that they're not going to be receiving the full block reward that Bitcoin will be having, which is the 12.5 coins. Now, if you're a miner and you have the ability to switch between different assets, then that 35-day period, that is a month-long period for a company. A month's a long time.
It is.
And question is to you is, what do you think will happen at that stage? Do you think a lot of the miners will switch over? So the miners that are currently in BSV and BCH, do you think they will switch over to Bitcoin just to mine that period of time and then switch back? Because of course that can be a concern, because if Bitcoin is so much more profitable to actually direct your hashing power towards, that could potentially leave those two networks with diminished hash power.
Yeah.
Which can kind of potentially affect security.
Yeah, so there are the 2 points that you mentioned are valid. We have seen that the miners, what they seek is just monetary incentives, income. So for them, it's not about loyalty. I have maybe seen one single pool, which is just loyal to Bitcoin, but it's not sustainable. Again, if they see that they're bleeding money, all they will do is just they will exhaust their resources and just like wind up. So it's all about the monetary incentives for them. So if they do see the opportunity of jumping to another blockchain and extracting more value from that, they will 100% do it. There's no other way of looking at it. And we have seen, for instance, with Bitcoin Cash had a small, not a bug, but it was the difficulty adjustments that were done on that network was modified compared to Bitcoin. So they were more reactive. So what the miners were doing, they were playing the game of like coming in, mining very, very quickly, and then just leaving the network to reduce the difficulty and then jump it back so they can generate more coins quicker.
And we saw a perfect example of that during the hash war.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can see that regardless of what blockchain, whichever it is, the miners, as you said, SHA-256, they can jump in and they just will extract the best value of it. Right now, Bitcoin Cash and BSV will be the first one to undergo the halvening, which means that they will most likely drop their hash rate because the monetary incentives will not be there from the block rewards. The only reason is that the hash rate will drop, in my opinion, is because even now that BSV, for instance, is trying to move the reward from the block reward into like fee rewards, they haven't built that much momentum in the transactions to basically accommodate and flip the fees to lose from the other side, but to compensate from the transactions. So I think that will come, but it's still not there. Hence, I think the hashing power of both will still drop. I don't think between now and 6 months, there will be like exponential growth where we will see that flip. So that's the reason that I think the network will drop on those two hashing power. And I think that hash will go back to Bitcoin because Bitcoin will still have another 1 month where it will be more profitable. So when this happens, as you said, so by dropping the hash from this network, it might open up a door for like another hashing power which will come in and try to destroy those networks. But it's still loads of money and time that those secret mining operations that need to put in place in order to do that and to achieve that. So I'm not that worried about that angle because I think destroying even one single coin will have a really devastating image towards the other coins in that industry.
I agree.
It is, you basically will be shooting yourself in the foot because even though you destroy one coin, how will you know that the other one will not be destroyed and you're putting your eggs in that basket.
And if you look at it from this way as well, now these miners that have come into the space, like you said initially, they've invested a lot of money. They have to, of course, acquire data centers. It is to that level now. They have to acquire a lot of hardware. Not just that, they have to make sure that their operating systems effectively are optimized to as much as they possibly can. So a lot of R&D basically goes in any miner, because mining in this space, it is extremely competitive. It's not something where I can tout all of my work last month and then it will stay with me for the next month's going. You have to perform every single day, every single second, otherwise you get left behind. You need to make sure that you're always innovating, meaning that it is an always constant expense. A very big business to get into, meaning that you have to have deep pockets to get involved. But if you do, it can be fruitful if you do it properly. So the miners will be looking for longevity as well, because they've outlaid so much capital. Now, they're not stupid. If you've invested $100 million, you know, you better know what you're doing.
You at least need to recap all your expenses that you have done.
Exactly. So what we were saying about Bitcoin, for example, and the fact that they've pegged it to 1 megabyte block sizes, that means that exponentially increases the fees for the users. Then that makes the users not actually want to use the network. Now the miners don't really have too much to actually mine, because they're not actually processing transactions, even though they might be validating blocks. Now, they know that. They know that it has a shelf life, some of the miners in the game anyway. So even though that they may push some of their hashing power over there for now, and it is literally just for now, they're going to make sure that the home is safe. The longevity of their operation is safe. Of course, you may take advantage of little price blips here and there, just like traders will, but you're always going to make sure that your long-term strategy is there.
Yeah, and if you look from a perspective, if you compare a mining operation or a miner to a business, what do you desire? It's just to have revenue streams, right? It's to have a consistent revenue. So you are not worried for tomorrow. And if we look at it, the way that the miners do operate right now on the Bitcoin network, it's simply based upon fees and reward. And rewards are actually most likely 90 to 95% of the whole amount of value that they can extract. And if you slash their rewards by 50% the next day, well, they need to question if their business is sustainable. Can they operate? Are their expenses and the revenue on par? Or they need to modify something, as you said, to make sure that they can sustain that. And at that stage, I think what will happen within like 7 and so months is a very interesting moment in time where we will, for the first time, see who is actually going to be benefiting on running mining operations, who is the most clever in this industry, and what they need to do. And for me, as a miner, it's not only down to I'm just going to extract value from the block rewards and that's it, that's my job done. As you said, they need to innovate. And as a business and as a miner, you need to start offering services. We have seen this opportunity when I think it was in 2017 when you said like fees were $20, $50.
Yeah.
That's still very, very low to compare to what crazy people were ready to pay.
Yeah.
We have seen like fees of like £1,000, £2,000 in single transactions.
Yeah.
And what really happened at that time was the miners were trying to compete and to include your transaction in their block by offering you transaction accelerators.
Yeah.
You remember those ones?
Yeah, I do.
So this, have you used one of those?
Thankfully not.
Yeah. So for those who don't know what transaction accelerators are, those are like services that a miner offered to guarantee that they can include your transaction by taking a small fee in addition to what you are already paying. So they were creating their own market, their own proper market of like money extraction and service that they offer. Yeah. It's a legitimate business. Or on a side thing, they can just get additional fees by, you know, accelerating your transactions. Yeah. We have seen some of the pools started doing, and then suddenly everybody started offering it. And this is what I think will happen, because the miners should think, and the mining corporations, they should think what they can do with the data and what everything as operation they do to start rolling out other services to be sustainable. And for that, I think there will be lots of things surrounding the data that they process. The amount of volume of transaction that they have needs to be basically archived somewhere so they can make sure that they can give access to that data for other parties. And genuinely speaking, I don't see just the rewards to be being the main incentive for the mining. In the future, we'll have mining as a business offering multitude of services, which will be consisting of like small other businesses or something like that.
Yeah. And the funny thing about this is a couple of days ago now, we actually went on a bit of a lunch meeting. And this was literally a day before the CoinGeek event happened out in Korea. And we were talking around this topic quite heavily and all the different ways that a miner could possibly create revenue and just creating a small little business. And then, so next day came in and then of course watched,
I remember that. Watching the video.
That actually watched the video.
Flashbacks.
And then we literally walked over to each other and was like, are you serious? It is literally not far from word for word exactly what our conversation was on how miners could eventually develop. And there's many different ways that people just cannot see right now on how they can actually create value on what you're saying about the data. And this is this was one of the topics that they brought up in the CoinGeek event on the panel. And the bottleneck that they can potentially see happening is the handling of that data and actually issuing it out to people that effectively would want to see it. So easiest way of kind of relating to it is, of course, you have a search engine being Google. Now, Google allows you to basically get to the information that you want to get to quickly and efficiently. So they can see that as being the next big business. And that's something that miners should now start really thinking about, which I completely agree with, and we completely agree with.
Indeed. And we shouldn't forget that it's not only monetary value that you transfer when you are doing a transaction. You can, Bitcoin SV is allowing you to do just a transfer of value. That can be any sort of something that you consider to be valuable, you can transfer to someone else. That can be a message, that can be a picture, that can be anything that you personally consider to be valuable. So if you transfer something valuable to someone else, that thing can be valuable over a long period of time. And for you to retrieve that back as well, it can be very valuable for you because something you have like stored somewhere forever, which is a service on its own that people can offer. One other thing I want to talk about the halvening, around the halvening, is the historical events, what happened when halvening happened, and the price correlation. I think it will be interesting to know those and maybe make some bold predictions on the next one. What do you say?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Why not?
So we have seen that, if my memory is correct, we have seen that on every halvening previously, the price kind of like went higher on the Bitcoin network. But we have also seen that, for instance, the last halvening on Litecoin, which happened, the miners literally stopped mining the coin, the hash rate dropped, and the price dropped. Now, I think that's truly where the correlation is, because the rewards were slashed. That was the only thing that they could have extracted it. And we have also seen that the price of the whole cryptocurrencies are on a decline, which means you can no longer do speculation as a miner. So all you do is just like mine something, sell them as quickly as you can, or just liquidate them in order to cover your expenses, your costs. You don't have that desire of like speculating anymore, because
you don't have the confidence. The confidence isn't there for you to hold that asset for the longevity and in the assumption that it's just going to continue to increase in price.
Indeed.
So it's only a natural response that you're just going to want to sell every single time that
because it's volatile. Because it's volatile, and mostly because it is on a decline trend. If it was an uptrend, you might still be tempted to, but we have seen that the reason that people are trying to sell quicker the assets is because they are worried that they will lose value.
Yeah.
So they're not just holding something where it just constantly loses value.
Yeah.
So my personal bold prediction will be that it will be almost identical to what it happened to Litecoin network.
Yeah.
I do think the hashing power will drop on Bitcoin network once the halvening happens. And I'll be really surprised to see how much it will drop.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much it will drop. I don't think it will be straight away 50% drop, but there will be some sort of a drop. I think not in a scale of like 50%, but I do think a good amount of hash will be just dropped to see what the price will stabilize to, and then they will re-enter or not, depending like if it's still beneficial for them to do so.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree, especially on, of course, Bitcoin BTC. Once that halvening event actually happens, I do think the price point really and truly only goes down, completely mimics effectively what happened to Litecoin. But what I also do think is BCH and also BSV, because of course they have their halvening events earlier, meaning that it will make sense for some of the hash power that is there to then go over to Bitcoin. So I do think during that period, you can have a situation, and of course, this isn't any form of financial advice, but during that period, you can have those two assets diminish in price because, of course, the hashing power that is supporting the network has dropped. So the amount that's been invested to support the network has also dropped. Bitcoin, I could see during that little small period of time, that month period, could maybe increase in price compared to effectively where those two assets are. But as soon as Bitcoin has its halvening, and I do believe over the next 6 months from that point, I do think you will start to see more hash power start to really return, well, go to BSV. Just because of all the reasons that we've built up today, token economics, and making sure that you have a completely well-oiled machine where every part is complementing the other. The only place that I do really see that is BSV.
Yeah, so in ideal scenario, what BSV should achieve between now and their first halvening is to match the amount of monetary value that you can extract from the block reward and to make sure that the fees can be the same amount, or half of that at least. Because if it halves, then you can have the other 6 and something, and plus the 6 of the block reward, you have again back to 12.5. So as if like no halving happened. So if within the next 6 months we increase the amount of transactions and make the blocks bigger, and we are able to gather so many transactions that it equals to 6 point something BSV as fees, by still maintaining very low fees, just increasing the amount of volume of transactions, then BSV can be in a very good position because you will not lose any network hash. The miners will still remain because they are still operating on the same basis, on the same reward. And as you said, we might also see some people from Bitcoin network moving back to or transitioning to BSV to maintain their revenue.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a perfect way of ending this as well is just bringing a point that you said earlier on the transaction accelerators, on how the miners then took that and then ran with it. And then you started to see more and more miners implementing that. During the CoinGeek event, we really did pay attention to the different ways that miners will start to operate and start to make money. And the same thing, you set a standard, then majority of the space will then follow. And the thing is, because transaction velocity is massively important, because if you don't have transaction velocity, so density in each of these blocks, why is it actually valuable? If no one's using the asset, why is it valuable? So BSV promotes that. And all of these cool ideas that are coming out from these miners to accelerate the process, it will incorporate that transaction velocity, which at the end of the day entices, where that comes from is you enticing users, meaning cheap fees. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out. And let's see if we're right, basically.
Yep, I can't wait. You're right. Let's wait and see what happens.
Same here. So, of course, if you've got anything else that, of course, you want to ask or then finish off on, then please feel free.
Not particular, but I'm really happy by what's really happening in the industry right now. Personally, I think it's an interesting time to be present, because you have the Halvening, which is going to happen in 6 months, but also the number of innovation which is happening in this industry. Lots of people are now trying to truly understand what Bitcoin is and what they can use it for. And it's quite interesting to see building real businesses around Bitcoin and not just speculative assets where you can just trade here and there. You actually build utility. And that's what I'm really, really passionate about.
Yeah, people are starting to explore the fact that Bitcoin is so much more than just money.
Indeed.
So without further ado, I think we'll call that the end of the episode. So of course, if you did like the content, please subscribe and hit the like button. All of the links will be available below on all of the different social media platforms that you'll be able to view the content. And until then, peace and love.
Thank you.